Okay, welcome everybody. Good to be with you today. Yesterday was the big reveal. Where we learned that Sophie is not real. That Sophie is not a flesh and blood human being. She is a character in a novel. In a novel that Albert Nog is writing for his daughter Hilda. Sophie's not real. Sophie's mom, Carlos, is not real. Alberto Knox is not real. Nothing we've read so far takes place in the real world.
Like a book in a book.
And like a book, it is exactly a book in a book. And now so what Sophie's dealing with is sort of an existential crisis. Everything she thought she knew about herself is no longer true. And there's a ticking clock for her. Of course there's a ticking clock for all of us. None of us are immortal, at least not in this realm. But Sophie is going to cease to exist as soon as Hilda's father comes home and gives her the finished copy of the book. Sophie's about to celebrate her 15th birthday. She will not have a 16th. She'll not have a 20th. She'll not have a wedding. She'll not have children. She'll not even be buried when she dies, because she'll never even get to die because she's not alive. And unlike what one would imagine the internal experience of most fictional characters is, what's happened with Sophie that's unique is that she and Alberto have figured it out. Have figured out that they are fictional characters. For all we know, so are we, or we're in somebody's dream, or we're in a simulation, or any of these things, but none of us have figured that out. Imagine if we're in a computer simulation, but there's a scheduled power outage, and the hard drive's going to be wired.
Scheduled
like
category 5 hurt.
That is the boat that Sophie is in. So let's pick up where we left off. Let's open it. Let me double check the page. Page 283.
Somewhere around there.
283. Whoa.
That's a pretty nice house.
Björkli, an old magic mirror great-grandmother had bought from a gypsy woman. Hilda Moller-Nog awoke in the attic room in the old captain's house outside Lillisland. Yes, we're finally meeting the real Hilda. And we're also finally experiencing something that takes place in the real world from the perspective of the book. She glanced at the clock. It was only 6 o'clock, but it was already light. Broad rays of morning sun lit up the room. She got out of bed and went to the window. On the way, she stopped by the desk and tore a page off her calendar. I'll rip some hair out. That'd be a page in the calendar. Can I do that? No? Okay. Thursday, June 14th, 1990. She crumpled up the page and threw it into her... Crumpled up the page and threw it into her wastebasket.
Whoa.
Friday, June 15th, 1990, said the calendar, now shining at her. Way back in January, she had written 15th birthday on this page. She felt it was extra special to be 15 on the 15th. It would never happen again. 15. Wasn't this the first day of her adult life? She couldn't just go back to bed. Furthermore, it was the last day of school before the summer vacation. The students just had to appear in church at 1 o'clock. And what more, in a week, Dad would be home from Lebanon. He had promised to be home for Midsummer Eve. It's a holiday celebration they have in Norway. That's where in that part of the world. Hilda stood by the window and looked out over the garden, down toward the dock behind the little red boathouse. The motorboat had not yet been brought out for the summer, but the old rowboat was tied up to the dock. She must remember to bail the water out of it after last night's heavy downpour. Let's turn to page 286. In the interim, these pages we're turning past, we get a little bit of the history of this property that's been in the Nog family for years. If it looks familiar to you, in Sophie's World, when Sophie goes into that cabin, one of the paintings on the wall of the cabin is of Hilda's actual house. So that's another sort of Easter egg that Hilda's father threw into the book for Hilda. So it's her 15th birthday. We're at the top of 286. Not surprisingly, she was pensive, nervous today. And not unnaturally, she was preoccupied with herself. 15 years old. She happened to glance at her bedside table. There was a large package there. It had pretty blue wrapping and was tied with red silk ribbon. It must be a birthday present. Could this be the present? The great big present from Dad that had been so very secret? He dropped so many cryptic hints in his cards from Lebanon, but he had imposed a severe censorship on himself. The present was something that grew bigger and bigger, he had written. Then he had said something about a girl she was soon to meet, and that he had sent copies of all his cards to her. Hilda had tried to pump her mother for clues, but she had no idea what he meant either. The oddest hint had been that the present could perhaps be shared with other people. He wasn't working for the UN for nothing. If her father had one bee in his bonnet, and he had plenty, it was that the UN ought to be a kind of world government. Maybe the UN one day really would be able to unite the whole of humanity. He had written on one of his cards. That was Francisco de Pretoria's dream 5 centuries earlier. Was she allowed to open the package before her mother came up from her room singing happy birthday to you with pastry and a Norwegian flag? Surely that was why it had been put there. Okay, long story short, it is her present. She opens it up and it's a book. Last sentence on the page. Had he written a whole book for her? On the first page, in large handwritten letters, was the title, Sophie's World. Farther down the page were 2 typewritten lines of poetry. Read those lines of poetry, Maya.
True enlightenment is to man like sunlight to the soil.
Hilda turned to the next page, to the beginning of the first chapter. It was entitled The Garden of Eden. She got into bed, sat up comfortably, resting the ring binder against her knees, and she began to read. I'm pointing at you.
Oh.
So what we're going to see for a couple pages is back and forth, real-time Hilda, and then what she's reading. So Amya will tell us what she's reading in this book called Sophie's World that is in her hand. In this book called Sophie's World, it's in your hand. So the meta just gets meta-er and meta-er and meta-er. Like you just get, I shouldn't insult you that much on film. Remind me to insult you when the camera's off.
No, please. Sophie Amundsen was on her way home from school. She had walked the first part of the way with Joanna. They had been discussing robots. Joanna thought the human brain was like an advanced computer. Sophie was not certain she agreed. Surely a person is more than a piece of hardware.
Hilda read on, oblivious of all else, even forgetting that it was her birthday. From time to time, a brief thought crept in between the lines as she read. Had Dad written a book? Had he finally begun on the significant novel and completed it in Lebanon? He had often complained that time hung heavily in one's hands in that part of the world. Sophie's father was far from home, too. She was probably the girl Hilda would be getting to know.
Only by conjuring up an intense feeling of one day being dead could she appreciate how terribly good it was to be alive. Where does the world come from? At some point, something must have come from nothing. But was that possible? Wasn't that just as impossible as the idea that the world had always existed?
Hilda read on and on. With surprise, she read about Sophie Amundsen receiving the postcard from Lebanon. Hilda Moller-Naub, care of Sophie Amundsen, 3 Clover Close.
Dear Hilda, happy 15th birthday. As I'm sure you'll understand, I want to give you a present that will help you grow. Forgive me for sending the card. See, what was that? Care of Sophie. It was the easiest way. Love from Dad.
The joker. Hilda knew her father had always been a sly one, but today he had really taken her by surprise. Instead of tying the card on the package, he had written it into the book. But poor Sophie, she must have been totally confused.
Why would a father send a birthday card to Sophie's address when it was quite obviously intended to go somewhere else? What kind of father would cheat his own daughter of a birthday card by purposely sending it astray? How could it be the easiest way? And above all, how was she supposed to trace this Hilda person?
No, how could she? Hilda turned a couple of pages and began to read the second chapter, the top hat. She soon came to the long letter which a mysterious person had written to Sophie.
Being interested in why we are here is not a casual interest like collecting stamps. People who ask such questions are taking part in a debate that has gone on as long as man has lived on this planet.
Sophie was completely exhausted. In the book, so was Hilda. Not only had Dad written a book for her 15th birthday, he had written a strange and wonderful book.
To summarize briefly, a white rabbit is pulled out of a top hat. Because it is an extremely large rabbit, the trick takes many billions of years. All mortals are born at the very tip of the rabbit's fine hairs, where they are in a position to wonder at the impossibility of the trick. But as they grow older, they work themselves even deeper into the fur, and there they stay.
Over the next few pages, Hilda is continuing to read Sophie's World, and she's tearing through it. So she reads through when Alberto teaches Sophie about the pre-Socratic philosophers. She reads through when he teaches her about Socrates. She reads through the visit to Athens through the TV and the time-traveling videotape and all that. She reads through the Plato chapter, the Aristotle chapter. She reads through when he teaches her about Hellenism and Christianity and the Middle Ages and the Renaissance.
Oh my God.
We're going to jump to page 297.
What the heck?
Because those are all things we've talked about in the past few days. About halfway down the page, is a paragraph that starts with the word otherwise. It was true enough that Sophie had revealed herself to Hilda. She was picturing the girl with the straight hair all the time. If you're I know everybody in here can read, but if you're a reader, like a passionate reader, or, my goodness, if you're a fan of stories of any kind, so if you're a passionate fan of certain TV shows, or animes, or comic books, or movies, or even video games have storylines that you find sometimes as you really get into the story, or if the story is really well written, you start to connect with the characters in the story as if they were real. You build your experience of emotional tie with the character is no less real just because that person is made out of ink or pixels. Right? The person may be less real, and we'll play with that idea and we'll debate that idea, and so will the book. But the connection that you have, the experience of connection is real, and it's important, and it's meaningful. And so Hilda is connecting directly with Sophie, even though Sophie is, I hate to use the word just, but I will, Sophie is just a character on the page. When Sophie gets home after spending most of the morning in St. Mary's Church, we didn't read that part, but she learned about the Middle Ages by meeting Alberto in an old church, and Alberto was dressed as a monk, and in Norway they have churches that are 1,000 years old that go back to the Middle Ages. When Sophie gets home, she stands in front of the brass mirror she took home from the cabin in the woods.
She studied the sharp contours of her own pale face, framed by that impossible hair which defied any style by nature's own. But beyond that face was the apparition of another girl. Suddenly, the other girl began to wink frantically with both eyes, as if to signal that she was really in there on the other side. The apparition lasted only a few seconds, then she was gone.
So you're aware, remember the magic mirror in the cabin. For Sophie, well, Hilda's got a mirror just like that nothing magic has happened yet, but the family legend is that it's a magic mirror. How many times had Hilda stood in front of the mirror like that, as if she was searching for someone else behind the glass? But how could her father have known that? Wasn't it also a dark-haired woman she had been searching for? Great-grandmother had bought it from a gypsy woman, hadn't she? By the way, the people known as the Romani don't prefer to be called gypsy anymore, but the book is 30 years old, and that was not considered offensive, or only beginning to be considered offensive. Hilda felt her hands shaking as they held the book. Oh wait, shake your hands as you hold the book. You can act that part out. Oh, that's great. You're just real good at that. She had the feeling that Sophie really existed somewhere on the other side. Does Sophie not exist because she's a character in a book?
No.
So, is Spider-Man real?
No.
Well, he's not. If he exists, his existence is not the same as yours or mine. But who has impacted more people's lives on this planet? Spider-Man or me?
Spider-Man.
Spider-Man. Spider-Man has brought joy to hundreds of millions of people. I have brought joy to nobody and misery to about 1,000 people. If we measure reality in terms of the impact it has on people, then some might say that Spider-Man is more real than I am. That's not exactly my position, but I think sometimes we tend to think of existence, being, as a switch. We either exist, something either exists or it does not. It's either on or off. Santa Claus is real, he is not real.
No, he's not. He is real.
Amya is real, ooh, she is not real. Yay!
Oh my gosh.
When it may be the case that existence, being, reality comes in degrees, that something can exist more than something else, all the way up to the possibility of an infinite existence from which all other existence flows and in which all other existence takes place. Where did we leave off? Oh, I actually literally lost my page.
298.
298. Yeah, what'd you do with my page? Okay, second paragraph, 298. Now Sophie is dreaming about Hilda and Björkli in the book. Hilda can neither see nor hear her, but then Sophie finds Hilda's gold crucifix on the dock. And the crucifix, with Hilda's initials and everything, is in Sophie's bed when she wakes after her dream. Hilda forced herself to think hard. Surely she hadn't lost her crucifix as well. She went to her dresser drawer and took out her jewelry case. The crucifix, which she had received as a christening gift from her grandmother, was not there. So she really had lost it. All right, but how would her father known it when she didn't even know it herself? And another thing, Sophie had apparently dreamed that Hilda's father came home from Lebanon, but there was still a week to go before that happened. Was Sophie's dream prophetic? Did her father mean that when he came home, Sophie would somehow be there? He had written that she would get a new friend. In a momentary vision of absolute clarity, Hilda knew that Sophie was more than just paper and ink. She really existed. Let's flip to page 300.
Santa Claus is real.
Okay. So Hilda is back. Hilda's back reading. So as we open, it's describing what she's reading, and then Amya will continue giving us the excerpts. Sophie's following Hermes through the town now. In Alberto's hall, she finds another card from Lebanon. This too is dated June 15th. Hilda was just beginning to understand the system of the dates. The cards dated before June 15th are copies of cards Hilda had already received from her dad. But those with today's date are reaching her for the first time via the ring binder that has the unfinished book.
Dear Hilda, now Sophie is coming to the philosopher's house. She will soon be 15, but you were 15 yesterday. Or is it today, Hilda? If it is today, it must be late then. But our watches do not always agree.
Hilda read about how Alberto told Sophie about the Renaissance and the new science, the 17th century rationalists like Descartes, and British empiricism like John Locke. She jumped at every new card and birthday greeting that her father had stuck into the story. He got them to fall out of an exercise book, turn up inside a banana skin, and hide inside a computer program. Without the slightest effort, he could get Alberto to make a slip of the tongue and call Sophie Hilda. On top of everything else, he got Hermes the dog to say, "Happy birthday, Hilda." Hilda agreed with Alberto that he was going a bit far comparing himself with God and Providence. But whom was she actually agreeing with? Wasn't it her father who put those reproachful or self-reproachful words in Alberto's mouth? She decided that the comparison with God was not so crazy after all. Her father really was like an almighty God for Sophie's world. When Alberto got to Berkeley, Hilda was at least as enthralled as Sophie had been. What would happen now? There had been all kinds of hints that something special was going to happen as soon as they got to that philosopher who had denied the existence of a material world outside human consciousness. The chapter begins with Alberto and Sophie standing at the window, seeing the little plane with the long happy birthday streamer waving behind it. At the same time, dark clouds begin to gather over the town.
So to be or not to be is not the whole question. The question is also who we are. Are we really human beings of flesh and blood? Does our world consist of real things, or are we encircled by the mind?
Not so surprising that Sophie starts biting her nails. Nail biting had never been one of Hilda's bad habits, but she didn't feel particularly pleased with herself right now. Then finally, it was all out in the open. For us, for you and me, the book says, this will or spirit that is the cause of everything in everything could be Hilda's father. Turn the page. First full paragraph. Hilda felt the tears start. To be or not to be, that is the question. She threw the ring binder to the end of the bed and stood up. She walked back and forth across the floor. At last she stopped in front of the brass mirror, where she remained until her mother came to say dinner was ready. When Hilda heard the knock on the door, she had no idea how long she had been standing there. Lost her place again. How long she had been standing there. But she was sure, she was perfectly sure that her reflection had winked with both eyes. She tried to be the grateful birthday girl all through dinner, but her thoughts were with Sophie and Alberto all the time. How would things go for them now they knew it was Hilda's father who decided everything? Although knew was perhaps an exaggeration, it was nonsense to think they knew anything at all. Wasn't it only her father who let them know things? Still, the problem was the same however you looked at it. As soon as Sophie and Alberto knew how everything hung together, they were, in a way, at the end of the road. She almost choked on a mouthful of food as she suddenly realized that the same problem possibly applied to her own world too. People had progressed steadily in their understanding of natural laws. Could history simply continue to all eternity once the last piece of the jigsaw puzzle of philosophy and science had fallen into place? Wasn't there a connection between the development of ideas and science on one hand and the greenhouse effect, deforestation on the other? Maybe it was not so crazy to call man's thirst for knowledge a fall from grace. The question was so huge and so terrifying that Hilda tried to forget it again. She would probably understand much more as she read further in her father's book. Let's flip to 305. Okay. About a quarter of the way down in the page, there's a little break and it starts a new section. That's what we're going to pick up. With this section, we are now back in Sophie's world, back in the fictional world of Sophie. And Amya, you're going to be Sophie for me, okay? Not long after her mother had gone, the telephone rang.
Sophie Amundsen.
This is Alberto. The major didn't spare any ammunition last night.
What do you mean?
The thunderstorm, Sophie.
I don't
You're
know.
doing the phones. It's a high quality production. I'm doing the phone thing, so everybody knows.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But you don't have to do it the whole time. Your pinky will hurt.
I don't know what to think.
That is the finest virtue a genuine philosopher can have. I'm proud of how much you have learned in such a short time.
I'm scared that nothing is real.
That's called existential angst or dread, and is as a rule only a stage on the way to a new consciousness.
I think I need a break from the course.
Are there that many frogs in the garden at the moment? Sophie started to laugh. Alberto continued. I think it would be better to persevere. Happy birthday, by the way. We must complete the course by Midsummer Eve. It's our last chance.
Our last chance for what?
Are you sitting comfortably? We're going to have to spend some time on this. You understand?
I'm sitting down.
You remember Descartes?
I think, therefore I am.
With regard to our own methodical doubt, we are right now starting from scratch. We don't even know whether we think. It may turn out that we are thoughts, and that is quite different from thinking. We have good reason to believe that we have merely been invented by Hilda's father as a kind of birthday diversion for the major's daughter from Lilithland. Do you see?
Yes.
But therein also lies a built-in contradiction. If we are fictive, we have no right to believe anything at all, in which case this whole telephone call is purely imaginary.
And we haven't the tiniest bit of free will. But wait, we haven't the tiniest bit of free will because the major who plans everything we say and do. So we can just as well hang up now.
No, now you're oversimplifying things.
Explain it then.
Would you claim that people plan everything they dream? It may be that Hilda's father knows everything we do. It may be just as difficult to escape his omniscience as it is to run away from your own shadow. However, and this is where I've begun to devise a plan, it is not certain that the Major has already decided on everything that's going to happen. He may not decide before the very last minute, that is to say, in the moment of creation. Precisely at such moments, we may possibly have an initiative of our own, which guides what we say and do. Such an initiative would naturally constitute extremely weak impulses compared to the Major's heavy artillery. We're very likely defenseless against intrusive external forces such as talking dogs, messages in bananas, and thunderstorms booked in advance. But we cannot rule out our stubbornness, however weak that may be.
How could that be possible?
The Major naturally knows everything about our little world, but that doesn't mean he's all-powerful. At any rate, we must try to live as if he's not.
I think I see where you're going with this.
The trick would be if we could manage to do something all on our own, something the Major would not be able to discover.
How can we do that if we don't even exist?
Who said we don't exist? The question is not whether we are, but what we are and who we are. Even if it turns out we are merely impulses in the Major's dual personality, that need not take our little bit of existence away from us.
Or our free will?
I'm working on it, Sophie.
But Hilda's father must be fully aware that you are working on it.
Decidedly so. But he doesn't know what the actual plan is. I'm attempting to find an Archimedean point.
An Archimedean point?
Archimedes was a Greek scientist who said, "Give me a firm point on which to stand and I will move the earth." That's the kind of point we must find to move ourselves out of the Major's inner universe.
That would be quite a feat.
But we won't manage to slip away before we finish the philosophy course. While that lasts, he has much too firm a grip on us. He has clearly decided that I'm to guide you through the centuries right up to our own time. But we only have a few days left before he boards a plane somewhere down in the Middle East. If we haven't succeeded in detaching ourselves from his gluey imagination before he arrives at Björkli, we're done for.
You're frightening me.
Okay, a couple comments and we'll wrap up for the day. So here Alberto is, some might say he's in denial. He's in denial. He's figured out what he is. More importantly, he's figured out what he is not. And yet he's clinging desperately to some shred of hope that he and Sophie might still have some control, might still have some freedom, even though there's literally an author writing their story. He wants to find some way to still exert his own free will. You know, even though, at least as far as we know, we're not characters in a fictional story or characters in somebody's dream, as far as we know. Are we all your dream, Victoria? Oh, Gwyneth. I just called you your mom's name. How embarrassing for you. Maybe Gwyneth is dreaming us. Maybe Gwyneth is dreaming us up. If you are, dream me younger next time. But we have no reason to think that's the case, right? We have every reason to think we're flesh and blood people. But we're in the same boat as Sophie, at least from two of the most prominent perspectives on the nature of reality. And these perspectives, though they're different and sometimes in tension, aren't necessarily contradictory. Many people hold to both perspectives at the same time. So, from the perspective that reality is the creation of a single, omnipotent, all-powerful, all-knowing, loving, and good God. From that perspective, God must surely know everything that is going to happen. He must surely know everything you're going to do, everything you're going to choose, and what the results of that choices will be. So, from within that perspective, the dilemma is, how can we possibly be free if there is an author of life who has already written our story, who we couldn't possibly hope to successfully defy? From the materialist, physicalist perspective, from the scientific perspective, which again is not necessarily in contradiction with the first perspective, but is a different perspective. Everything is atoms and the subatomic particles that make up the atoms. And when two atoms come in contact with each other, they don't decide what they're going to do. Their fate is entirely dictated by the laws of physics. Same with 3 atoms, 4 atoms, 5. What would make it different about the billions and billions of atoms that make up you and I? It also seems from that perspective that from the very first instant of the universe, everything is already determined, because atoms can't defy the laws of physics and we are atoms. So from the 2 most dominant perspectives on reality in the world, you may hold one, you may hold both, you may hold neither, but those are the 2 dominant perspectives. We have the same dilemma as Sophie and Alberto right now. We'll see what they're going to do with it. One other comment about the plot, and then we'll be finished for today. So Alberto is now scheming. He's going to try because he's in the unique position of knowing that he's fictional. He's going to try to break him and Sophie out of the book. Woo. He's going to try to escape the creation of the author and leave the story. To do this, he's going to have to try to go unnoticed by the author of the story. Will they be successful? What impact will that have on Sophie's world? Or will they cease to exist in just a few days? We'll find out in a couple of weeks, where the next couple of weeks are mostly testing and holding with indeterminate number of class meetings or people in those class meetings. So after those 2 weeks, when we come back together for a week straight of actual class in May, we will wrap the story up with lesson 51, which is called The Revenge of Stories in Stardust, where we'll learn the ultimate fate of Sophie and her world. Pascalis, you want to take a selfie?
That's me.
Amya, you want to drop out of high school?
No, thank you.
That's all I need from you for today.
Okay.
The rest of the time is yours.
Ow!